Hey guys, it's Kat and I'm back today to do a video on a new palette. I don't know, if you've been on my channel for the past year or so, you'll notice that I've been giving a lot of love to older palettes, but this palette came across my desk yesterday and it's just been released in the US. It's just it was released for one day only in Australia yesterday, so you could buy it online. And it's actually going up, I think in Australia on the 26th. But for people that aren't familiar with this palette, it is the Naked Reloaded. So Urban Decay discontinued their Naked palette and then they released a Reloaded palette. So it's sort of like a revamped version that's different, but I think it's supposed to fit that same sort of part of their range. Anyway, we were sent this through PR, so through Mecca. So we sent it over at Beauty News. So we got one and Hayley was like, use it. They're your kind of colors. Enjoy. So I thought what I'll do today is not only a swatch comparison to the Sultry palette, because that is a big criticism of this palette. The colors look very, very similar to the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette, which came out over the holiday season, sort of end of last year, and I love the Sultry palette. So I was actually really excited to see another palette that had similar colors to the Sultry palette, but a lot of people wanted to see swatch comparisons, so I'm going to do that. I'm also going to do this weird series that I like to do where I use the palette for the first time. I sort of show you my reaction and the look I create, and then I'll check back in over 4 to 6 days as I use the rest of the palette and show you the looks I created and what I think of the palette. So this is a bit of a mishmash. If you haven't watched this sort of series before, it might be like, what the hell is she doing? But we're trying it out, we're swatching it, and then I'll be checking back in and giving you a decent idea of what I think about the palette as a whole after using every single shade in multiple looks. So anyway, let's get on to the actual palette. So like I said, it's just been released in the US. This is the box. It's got these sort of orchid flowers on it, and you can see the shades at the back. Okay, I do have a lot of knowledge about Urban Decay, but I'm not one of their avid collectors. So just looking at the shades, there are some familiar sounding shades, but I think they've been reloaded, revamped, you know, that kind of thing. So we've got Barely Baked, whereas Baked was the gold shade, I believe, in the original Naked palette. Then we also have over here Bucked, and Buck was one of the matte shades, I believe. So they've given a nod, I think, to some of the shades, but I think they're all new. I could be wrong, but I think they're all new. Anyway, the actual packaging is very different to previous Naked palettes. So the first Naked palette was that felt, which no one really liked. I feel like they're sort of channeling the felt with this, which I don't know why they needed to do that. And then they moved over to tins and like the plastic packaging. So they've sort of upped their game as time goes on, and then they've sort of gone backwards and made this sort of silky feel. So it gives a good effect because the flowers look like they have a lot of dimension to them. And you've got the gold writing, which looks really, really cool. But this is essentially a cardboard palette with a sort of silky material coating. And even though that might be a little bit better than felt because you can sort of wipe it off if you get product on it, it's going to get messy. It's going to get messy. So I don't know why they did that, but it is very, very sort of thin and compact, which is nice. It does have a mirror. I'm actually happy that it has a frosted covering over it right now because I can actually hold it up and you don't see like the camera and stuff. So that's kind of cool. And you can see that it's missing the double-ended brush, and then all the other ones have a space in the bottom for a brush. So it is a revamped design, and you might also notice that it's got this normal size pans, and then it's got a medium size pan and a large pan. So what they've done, which a lot of people don't like the look of, and I totally understand, I think they've put the shades that you theoretically use the most in the bigger pans, and then sort of shades that you would use a lot in medium size pans, and then the other shades are in the sort of standard shape pan. But this still does contain 12 shades like a normal Naked palette. It is just a different format. And for people who wanted a comparison to the Sultry palette, you can see that it does hit a lot of the same notes. So it's not super identical, but they definitely do have the same sort of browns. They have the same sort of bronzes, same sort of transition shades, and like, you know, your basic nude shades. And then I think what really makes it look sultry is there's sort of like a shimmery gray, a matte sort of coral, a matte coral. So yeah, I think it's mainly those sort of features that make this look very, very similar. But before I do compare them, I did want to point out that when brands bring out products like this, it's often in the works for over a year. And the Sultry palette came out, it was like November or something, or October. So there's no way that they actually copied Sultry. It's more that it's just, they had the same inspiration. They had the same sort of color vibes going. This still has a lot more like silvers and grays in it. So I still feel like the color story isn't identical, but we'll see with swatches. All right, so this is the palette close up before I swatch it. You can see how it looks. You can see also the design of like the packaging. It's a plastic with this sort of cross-hatched design. So it is very different to the original ones. I am going to swatch this on its own, and then I'm going to swatch the dupes. I also wanted to point out that some of these look like they could be mattes or satins. I'm not too sure. Bribe looks like a matte. Retro looks like a matte. Endgame looks like a matte with a slight shimmer in it. So we'll see how that swatches. Bucked looks like a matte, and Blur also looks like a matte. So in the original Naked palette, there was only 2 mattes, and this one, I don't know, it looks like it at least has 4, maybe 5. So we will swatch it. All right, I'm going to try to fit all the shades on one arm. We're going to start with the first shade, which is Bribe, and it's the one that sort of looks like it's maybe a matte cream, but it's a very, very soft, and it's definitely got a bit of sheen to it. So that's definitely a satin finish. Then we have Barely Baked. This is a soft sort of champagne gold. It's a very, very soft and subtle compared to the first Baked eyeshadow, which is kind of like a really bold gold. Then we have Angel Fire, which is actually a really pretty shade. This doesn't have much base color, but it's more of a topper shade. And it's got almost like a peachy duochrome sort of shift to it. Very, very subtle, but it reminds me of the sort of sparkly highlighters you get from the Anastasia Beverly Hills Dream Glow Kit, where they have like that chunkiness, but they're really pretty and delicate and have a slight color shift. It kind of reminds me of that. So this one looks like it's a fun topper shade. All right, then we have a Retro, which is that matte sort of coral shade. This is a little bit powdery, but it does sort of build up quite nicely, or not build up, does apply quite nicely, but a little bit powdery. Then we have the shade Reputation, which is like a coppery bronze. It's a very pretty shade. And next to it looks very similar. This is Burn, and this reminds me a lot of the shade from the Naked Heat palette, where it's got like a blackened base, but it's got this beautiful sort of red color, like shimmer to it. So it's pretty, but this effect is quite similar to that, but I suppose on the eye it would be very different. All right, now onto sort of the cooler browns. So you can see that these are much cooler browns. We've got Endgame, which is a matte. It's just like a dark brown matte. I think it does have a slight shimmer in it, but it performs like a matte. Then we have Dreamweaver, which is a really chunky glitter. So that is a very pretty shade. It's got, this reminds me a lot of some of the Pat McGrath shades that have sort of like a brown base, but they're mainly glitter. It is very, very flaky though, but it's a pretty color. And then we have Distilled, which is like a warm, this is very similar to some of the original shades in the Naked palette. Bronze, it's got a bit of a gold sort of color to it. So compared to these, it's more warm and it's got a bit of a gold shimmer in it. All right, I was worried about not being able to fit the last 3 in, but I think we can do it. So we've got Bucked, which is just your sort of caramel matte brown transition color. We have Boundaries, which is more of a satin. So once again, it's got a slight sheen to it, and it looks on camera quite similar, but in person it looks a lot more orange. And then the last shade is Blur, which is your matte cream. So if you wanted a matte cream shade that does sort of look like it blurs into the skin, it's very close to my skin tone, which is why it's hard to show up. You have like a satin at this end that's a little bit more cooler toned, and you have a slightly more peachy, warm toned matte there. So those are all the colors. They're quite pretty. There's a nice range of deeps and lights and different finishes, which is good. So that's that. All right, now I'm just going to do some dupes and compare some to the Sultry palette. All right, so from the Sultry palette, we've got Fresh, which is just a matte cream. Compared to that in the Reloaded, we have that first shade, which is the same sort of color, but it's a different finish. This does have a slight shimmer in it. So this is So this one's Bribe, and then we have Blur, which you can tell is a completely different color. It's more of a peachy color. This, once again, looks like it just blurs into my skin because it's quite similar to my skin tone. Then I've got the two sort of shimmery shades from Anastasia. We have Pearl, which is more of your really highly shimmery. Oh, I did that over the other one because I didn't see it. Oops, you get it. Pearl compared to Angel Fire, they are very, they have a similar sort of sparkly finish, but this has a much peachier tone and it's more like a topper glitter, whereas this is more like your sort of bold glitter. I don't know. They have a similar effect. You can definitely see the nuances in color in person though. All right, we've got Steampunk from Anastasia Beverly Hills, which is a really, really bold metallic gold compared to Barely Baked. Very, very different. So they're both golds, but they're very, very different finishes and different colors. I'm going to skip over Rose Quartz and Ember because there's no dupes for those in the Naked palette, and go over to Bloom and Birch. All right, so Bloom is this shade from Anastasia. It's like a bright sort of pinky coral, and Retro from Urban Decay is more of a softer coral. It's a little bit, they're both as pigmented as each other. They're just, different intensities of coral. Last one that I'm going to fit on this arm, we've got Birch from Anastasia Beverly Hills, and we have Bucked from Urban Decay. So they're both transition shades. One is a little bit more sandy, one is a little bit more brown. So there are similarities, but they're not dupes, if that makes sense. All right, I'm also going to skip over Cinder and Twig because we don't have shades like this in the Naked palette, so I'll go over to these guys. All right, so from Anastasia Beverly Hills, this is Teak, and then from Urban Decay, we have Distilled. So they're both sort of shimmery browns. One is a little bit more foiled, one has a little bit more glitter in it, but they're similar colors. This is from Anastasia Beverly Hills. It's Dystopian, and that's Endgame from Urban Decay. Once again, very similar sort of cool toned dark browns. In the pan, I can understand why people think Cyborg and Dreamweaver look sort of similar, but I'll swatch them as being the last comparisons because this has a matte grey, and a matte black, whereas the Naked palette doesn't. All right, Cyborg from Anastasia Beverly Hills, and we have Dreamweaver from the Naked palette. They're very, very different. And here we just have some shades from the Naked Reloaded and the Sultry palette that don't cross over at all. So these are more warm shades, and these are more metallic and grey tone and black shades. So you can see that there are a lot of different shades in these palettes. All right, so what does all that actually mean? Not too much. The Sultry palette has more shades. There's 14 shades in here compared to 12, and it's got a lot more cool tone shades and some different shimmers compared to the Naked Reloaded. So do you need them both? Do you need the Naked Reloaded if you've got Sultry? It just depends. This does have a lot more warmth in it, so you can see that these sort of shades, this is very different. You've got more sort of orangey tones. So this sort of reminds me of a mix between a nude palette and maybe the Naked Heat, because these sort of shades here and the oranges really remind me of the Naked Heat. So if you have the Naked Heat and you have Sultry, you probably can create some very similar looks. But if you like these sort of colors in your everyday palettes, like there's no problem having both. There's not like exact dupes. The ones that do sort of look very, very similar are the like standard chocolate brown, which is in a lot of palettes, and also just the metallic sort of brownie bronze. So they're pretty standard shades, but so yeah, there are differences, but it definitely has a similar sort of vibe. All right, because I've got a sort of bold lip on today, I might do a pretty simple eye look. I'm just going to put some primer on. This is by NARS. It's the NARS Tinted Smudge Proof Eyeshadow Base in the shade Medium. Surprisingly, medium suits my skin tone really well. All right, so I'm just going to set my base with the shade Blur, and then I might go into the orange, and I'm thinking I might also go into that sort of topper shade, that really interesting shade. I really want to see how that applies, and I'm sort of vibing more of a subtle eye look today, so I might do that just for my first sort of look. This is quite peachy. So if you've got sort of a mid-tone skin, you might really like this to set your base, but for me, you can see the color in it. So it looks quite light in the pan, but it actually does apply like with a bit of color to it. So I wouldn't take this up to the brow bone because it would just make my eyes look really, really dark. But it's sort of like a nice natural crease color if you just wanted a really quick eye look without too much color. Or like I said, if you've got medium skin, this would be like your skin tone. So it would be a nice one to set your base. I'm just setting the crease a little bit. And I've got a skin reaction. So if it looks really bumpy there, it's under control. Don't you worry. Just for some comparison, I want to use Bribe just up here. So you can see that's a lot lighter and you can see it's a little bit shiny. So I don't know why brands do that. Like it's okay for a brow bone highlight, but it really does emphasize skin texture if you have that little bit of shine up in this area. So it works well as a really soft sort of brow bone highlight, but if you wanted to set your whole eye with it, it will start showing texture a little bit, but there you go. Those are those two shades. All right, I'm really curious to see how Angel Fire goes. Oh, it's a very pretty twinkly shade. Okay, it does apply with a brush, but very barely. I think this would be better over a glitter glue or applied with your fingers, but it's a very pretty, what I like to call everyday glitter shade. It just gives a twinkle to the eyes without it being too chunky glitter. It's actually a really pretty color. This is the sort of color I'd go for on sort of like, I want a bit of brightness on my eye, but I don't want to have to do anything that requires a lot of eyeshadow or a lot of effort. This is just a really kind of easy shade. I just would prefer it if I didn't have to apply it with my finger. Okay, I'm going to keep it really simple today, but to sort of finish it off, I'm going to use Boundaries, which is this sort of satin orangey shade. I'm going to put that on the lower lash line into the crease a little bit and then maybe go a little bit more in with that lid shade in my inner corner. All right, I'm just applying this with a small fluffy brush because I just want it to be sort of like a diffused lower lash line. I don't want it to be too bold because the lid color is quite subtle. But when you do pick it up, it does create a lot of kickback, which, a lot of eyeshadows do that. The Anastasia one does that, but yeah, it's very, very powdery. The benefit of that though is that it does blend nicely. So you can see that it does apply on the eye pretty well, and then you can sort of blend it out pretty easily. So powdery eyeshadows do have the benefit of being blendable, but it does mean that you need to just be careful with, not picking up too much product. Okay, I'm just going to go back in with a little bit more of that topper shade, which is really pretty. I think it's a really pretty shade. And then just with a firmer sort of pencil brush, I'm just putting that in here. Once again, because it's a topper shade and it does have a peachy sort of iridescence, sort of looks a lot different just on its own versus over the top of something else. I'm not sure if you can see, but I can see that even though, I need to build this up, it gives more of a peachy look over the orange than it does on the top of the lid. So I'm not sure if you can see, it looks peachier here and then more champagne there. So it is one of those sort of duochrome, sort of transformy, not like, doesn't transform the look heaps, but it does look slightly different depending on what you put it over, which I think is really pretty. Hopefully if I turn down the brightness, you can see the shimmer a little bit better. It does actually look really pretty. It's just sort of hard to capture on camera. All right, and that's a look just with a little bit of mascara. I'm just using the MAC Extended Play mascara, which has a really, really tiny wand. And it's fun to sort of just get like more of a separated, more natural look. So that's what I used. All right, so that is the first look. I sort of went with a really basic look to start off with, which probably isn't the best decision, but I sort of thought that this is how I would want to reach for this palette if I was just going for a really sort of basic look. This is the sort of makeup I would wear if I was just, seeing friends or family and not actually filming or going out. So I thought this sort of works well with how I would probably want to use this palette. I do think that on first impressions, like this shade is very, very powdery, and this shade you need to apply with your finger. But I do think that, if I wasn't talking this through and filming it, I could do this look, this sort of eye look in 5 minutes. It could be a very, very quick and easy everyday makeup look. And I think for that sort of purpose, this performs quite nicely, and I do actually like the overall look. I think you can't capture the sort of twinkly topper effect as much on camera than you can in person, but I think it's, yeah, this is the kind of look that I like. All right, we are day 2 with the Naked Reloaded palette. This is the look I created. I'm trying to sort of only use a couple of key eyeshadows in each look so I can really kind of tell you what I think about each particular shade or a couple of shades. So I do want to say quickly though, I really like the sleekness of this palette. It is so much sleeker than the other palettes, the tin palettes, the plastic palettes, even the original palette. This is like really thin, and I don't love the material, and someone's watching me film myself. It's really awkward. Do I wave to them? No. Anyway, we're just going to continue, but yeah, I think if it wasn't for this sort of fabric, if it was more like something you can easily wipe down, I actually really like this sort of padding. It feels like, you know, if you put it in traveling, it won't like break, it won't sort of bend. I don't know, I kind of like the actual packaging minus the material. Anyway, the shades that I'm wearing today, so like I said, I only want to sort of focus on a couple at a time. I wanted to focus on these two because I really wanted to see how they differ. So we saw in the swatches that they're both sort of like coppery, bronzy shades, but one has more of a blackened base and one has not a blackened base. So I put them both on my eyes today, and I don't know if you can even see that I've put two shades on because they give a very, very similar finish. So that's the one that's not blackened, that's the one that is blackened, so Reputation Burn. But I just found that when you put them together like this, it sort of gives the effect, like they both are pretty, and I think, you know, I understand using them both, but I feel like it gives an effect similar to, give me a second, similar to if you got, see, I'm worried about picking this up because I'm going to get it dirty, similar to if you layered this one over this one. So if you just went with a dark base and then the light one over it, I sort of feel like it's going to give the same effect. So I haven't tried this is just an experiment, but brown, put that over the top, you sort of get a similar, I'm going to put a little bit more over the top, but you get a similar sort of effect. So it's got, I don't think you need both of these is what I'm saying. I think you can get the effect using a layering process, a really simple layering process. Because when I put on the outer corner, so I put the darker one on the outer corner and I put the lighter one on the sort of main part of the lid, I just thought, oh, it sort of looks like I've put the color all over, but I've just taken a dark matte and sort of just intensified the corner a little bit, which I didn't do. So I just feel like for me, they didn't need to be both in the palette. They're pretty shades and they applied really nicely. They were really easy. There wasn't any fallout. I just used like a packing brush. It was super, super easy. Then I blended it out a little bit with Bucked, so that one there. And then I sort of blended it, like transitioned it further up with Bribe, so that sort of semi-shimmery one. I just felt like I needed to lighten it a little bit because I took it quite high. But that's all I've used. Oh, and I lied. I actually used Angel Fire, that sort of shimmery shade I used all over the lid. I popped that in the inner corner and I think it's really pretty. I'll zoom in so you can see. So hopefully you can see I just put that sort of in that area and it gives a really pretty brightness. It's not too frosty. It's not too sort of intense, but it gives a nice twinkle, and I think the colors really work well with the colors on the lid. But I did the same thing on the lower lash line as I did the top lash line, so that's sort of just that bronzy copper color, and then the one with a blackened base just here, and I did the same thing down there and blended them out with matte. So if it looks like I've got like a dark brown in the crease, it's not. It's just that I buffed that outer corner shade a little bit into the crease, and you can mainly see the dark base when you do that. So they're both really pretty shades. I really like the colors. I really like the look. I like how they applied. I just don't think you need them both in the same palette because you can sort of get the same effect layering. Like, it is a pretty color, but yeah, they just blend into one. So all right, guys, we're back for day number 3 for the Urban Decay Naked Reloaded. And today I've gone for like a cooler toned, smoky brown eye. Ignore my patch here. It makes everything look patchy, but it's not. But on my eyes today, I wanted to pretty much hit up the sort of cool tone browns. So I used this shimmery one all over just to set my base just up here. It does, because it's got a bit of a shimmer in it, it does emphasize skin texture a little bit, but not too badly. So this is one that you could easily use to sort of set your base, or you could use this slightly darker one, but I used this one. Then in the crease, I use this shade here. So that one is Bucked. That one is Bribe. And for all over the lid, I patted a little bit more primer after I sort of set the crease, because I really wanted this to stick. It is sort of like a chunky glitter. It's very flaky. This is Dreamweaver. It's got like a really dark cool tone brown base with silver glitter. I put that all over the lid. Surprisingly, I thought this was going to be really flaky, have a lot of fallout. It wasn't too bad. I found that I was a little bit cautious with it, but I put it on with sort of like a packing brush. It applied all right. It wasn't super bold, but it didn't like rain down. It wasn't an issue. There were a couple of flecks of silver glitter that I just brushed away. It wasn't an issue. So even though that is very, very flaky, you can work it without too much hassle. If you really wanted to build it up for a really intense glitter, I think you'll have a hard time, because as you can see, I'll zoom in soon, it's not a super intense glitter, but it is a nice cool tone brown. I then ran this shade here on my lower lash line, so it's a little bit warmer compared to the top. See, that's like a more neutral brown, that's like a cooler tone brown. I was going to use Dreamweaver on my lower lash line, but I just thought if I'm sort of blending it in, it's sort of tempting fate to rain down and ruin my base. So I just thought I'll use Distilled instead. And then I simply use some of this shade here, Endgame, just in the crease and on the outer corner, as well as a little bit on the lower lash line. So it's just made a dark sort of cool tone brown smoky look with a little bit of glitter. I used some brown liner on my waterline and on my lash line to sort of complement it. And then what I did to sort of brighten the inner part was I used this gold shade. Now this gold shade is actually really nice. So Barely Baked, it is a soft gold. It's like a champagne gold, but I sort of like the idea of using a warmer shade to contrast with a cooler eye, similar to how yesterday I used these warm shades and I used the cooler highlight shade to go with those. It just sort of pops against it, and I did actually like this. It's quite soft, but you can build it up, and it's not as it's not glittery like Angel Fire like I used yesterday. So it's more of a nice sort of just a traditional shimmer. You can build it up or you can sort of soften it down. I like this look. It wasn't anything groundbreaking. Could I get this look using the Sultry palette? Probably. Can I get it probably more intense using the Sultry palette? Probably. I did find that this shade was super pigmented. When I put it on, I was like, whoa, that's a lot of brown. And then you blend it out and it blends out really nicely. I do think the mattes in this palette, if you just use, if you stuff it up a little bit, they do blend away. So if you get another brush, like a clean brush, you can really fix it and blend it away. And I thought that was really helpful because you can really correct any mistakes. But the good thing is they don't really blend together. So often really blendable eyeshadows, they sort of blend all into one. It makes one really sort of just muddy look. Okay, this look is a muddy look because it's brown, but all the colors did stay distinctly different, which was good. So hopefully you can see the look there. I've got the cool tone sort of sparkly brown with a bit of silver glitter that you can see. I've put a bit of that dark brown just to deepen. I've got that warmer shimmery brown on the lower lash line and the gold in the inner corner. So you can see it there as well. I think it's a pretty look. It's a nice sort of smoky brown, so you can get smoky looks out of this. And these perform very similar to other Naked palettes. So they're not the best eyeshadows in the world, but they're very, very sort of usable and wearable. All right, hello guys. We're back for day number 4 with the Urban Decay Naked Reloaded. You know that we've been doing it. I get it. Today I just did a really simple look. I really wanted to use Distilled, which is that sort of bronze dark brown shade. So since the last look I did was using some of the cooler browns, and I'd used some of the sort of warmer reddy browns before, I really wanted to use this guy on its own. So I've just put that all over the lid. I will zoom in so you can see it a bit better. It applied very easily. There was no issues. There wasn't fallout. It applied on the base really nicely, but it wasn't super, super intense metallic foiled. It is just a shimmer. So yeah, it's a nice color. I think if you built it up, you could make it sort of much more rich. If you sort of sheared it out, you can tone it down a little bit. So it's one of those shades that I like, these kind of shades. I understand a lot of people don't really use browns, but they're sort of my go-to, you know, days like this. Simple days. The only other eyeshadow I used with it was Boundaries, which is that sort of orangey transition color. This does apply more like a matte. It does have a bit of shimmer in it, but I feel like it might just to help the formula sort of blend on the eye, but you can't really see the shimmer once it's applied. So I'll zoom in so you can see it's a bit bright at the moment. It's a really middle of the day, it's really hot. But yeah, it's just brown, but warmed up a little bit in the crease. So that's a close up of the look. You can just see that it's, you know, shimmery brown all over the lid and on the lower lash line. And then I just blended it out with that warmer orangey transition shade. So it's very, very simple, but it worked really well. And I like it. Yeah, this is a kind of everyday makeup that I chuck on, like 2 eyeshadows, and this worked really easily. It took me like a minute to do the eyeshadow. All right, guys, we're back for the final day and the conclusion of what I think about the Naked Reloaded palette. So today on my eyes, I have a pretty simple look. I wanted to use that sort of coral color, that pinky coral color. So I used, once again, this shade here, which is that one with a slight sheen just on my brow bone, and to sort of set my crease, I went in with that coral shade, so retro in the crease, on the outer corner and a little bit on the lower lash line, and I used Barely Baked, which is the gold, just on the rest of it. So, and also in here just to brighten that area. So 3 shades. It was very, very, very easy to apply. I'm gonna have to say that coral shade, I did sort of diffuse it quite a lot. It's quite an intense shade. You put it on and it really packs a punch, but you can blend it out to the level you want. So if people were wondering, is it a really weak shade? Is it a really shit shade? It's not. It actually goes on pretty strong, and then you can diffuse it if you want, which is sort of what I did. I sort of kept it at sort of a medium level so you can see it, but it's not like a pink, like bold crease. So you can see this is a very simple look. I've just gone, like I said, gold. I've got that sort of highlight shade. I've got the pink. I've blended it out. It's 3 shades. It literally took me maybe a minute to 2 minutes to create. It blended really nicely, and then I just used some mascara. Really, really simple look. I would happily do this look in sort of the warmer months if I want a bit of a pop of color, but I want it to be quite simple. It's a very fun, light, colorful look. So after using this palette for 5 days, I definitely have sort of my final thoughts on it. And I have used every shade enough for me to kind of have a good idea of the formula. I do think that this is not a bad palette. Surprisingly, I was very skeptical of this palette when I first saw it. I was like, why do you need to reload the Naked palette? But overall, the shades are very easy to use, and you can create some really nice nude, neutral, warm, slightly cool brown looks, which, you know, they're not revolutionary and they're not super exciting, but the Naked palette is one of those palettes that you wear like on a daily basis. So you can take this from like day to night. You can do mattes, you can do it warm, you can do it cool. So I do like this palette. Overall, I do like it. I think over the past 5 days, I've enjoyed the looks that it's created. And there's been nothing difficult about this except for this one shade here. Now, this wasn't so difficult to apply. You just had to be careful because it is a flaky formula. So, you know, if you wanted a really sort of bold glitter look, you're not going to really get it out of this unless you put it over the top of a glitter glue and you press it on with your finger, or even apply it slightly damp. Just as it is, it's a nice shade. It gives you more of a cool toned, slightly sparkly brown effect, but it is not like a bold silver or anything like that. I do think the mattes are nicely pigmented. They blend out really well as well, so you can pack it on or you can blend it out to diffuse it. I thought that was really nice. I think even though Angel Fire is a bit of a, once again, a bit of a chunky formula, I think it's a really beautiful shade, and it works well as like a topper or as an inner corner sort of pop of brightness. It's not a really shimmery or a really duochrome shade, but it does add a little bit of uniqueness to a look. There is a bit of redundancy here, like I said, with these 2 shades. I also think these 2 end shades, I would have liked to have seen one more of a caramel brown for people with deeper skin tones, and they turned this light one into a flat matte. But I actually think the shade range was pretty. Then again, I do want to point out that I do like brown eyeshadow. I've got brown eyes, and cool brown eyeshadows, warm brown eyeshadows, reddy brown eyeshadows, dark brown, light brown. It all works really well on my coloring. So this is something that I gravitate towards. So naturally, I am biased to liking this color story. If you don't like this color story, do not get this palette. But if you are curious about the formula and you've tried Naked palettes before, this is very cat sneeze. This is very comparable to the Naked one. So if you like that formula, it's not the best formula in the world. It's not the most pigmented. It's not the most amazing, but it's very, very usable and very easy to use. You don't need to be a professional makeup artist to make this work. I've seen so many palettes come out in the last couple of years where if people are struggling with it, the brands or the brand's supporters are always like, you're using it wrong. It's designed for being a professional makeup artist, or you've got to use it this way. And this is not one of those palettes. You can pick this up and anyone can use it, which is great. It's just a matter of, do you like the color story? One thing I also want to point out, even though I've said this before, even though I don't like the packaging feel, because the fabric always irks me because makeup is messy, I think the packaging, like the design and the sleekness, is great. Also, surprisingly, I don't hate the different size pans. When I first saw this advertised, I was like, oh, why are you having 3 different size pans? Like, you've got, 8? Yeah, 8 in the middle that are the standard size pans, 2 that are slightly bigger, and then 2 that are even bigger than that. And it really irked me. But when using it, you actually don't notice it too much. Like personally, when I pick this up to put it on my face, I don't go, ugh, big pans, so annoying. It's fine. It really doesn't bother me. I do think that the choices of what they put in the big pans, I don't really like the choices. I just don't think these 2 shades are the ones that people will reach for the most in this palette, but I could be wrong. I've only used it for 5 days, and I really like the sleekness of the packaging. I think it's a good sort of travel size, but it's comprehensive. You don't need to reach for other palettes or other eyeshadows to make complete looks, which I really like about this. Now, people may be asking, which one do I prefer? And I do still prefer the Sultry palette for a couple of reasons. I actually prefer the packaging of this. I think this seems really bulky all of a sudden, whereas this one seems a lot more sleek. But the reason I prefer the Sultry, look, I think the formulas are a little bit more pigmented. So I really like a metallic shimmery eyeshadow. I think they're beautiful, and this has it in spades. What I also liked about this palette that this one does not have is that the grays are very unique and also very, very wearable grays. It's hard to get really wearable grays. For me, I don't really like grays on my eyes, but these are very, very flattering. So I think this is more of a unique color story, and I personally prefer the really bold sort of foiled looks that you can get out of this. But I feel like this to me could be a going out palette or elevating your look to more of a nighttime palette or a bold eye look. And this to me is more of a daytime palette. Like if I was just going for something sheer and quick and nothing too glittery or intense or, what do I pair a silver with? I think this is a really, really usable palette. I can definitely see myself on a daily basis wanting to reach for Distilled or wanting to reach for Reputation. That was a beautiful shade. I actually really like the look that created. Or even the Gold, just reaching for those as an all over lid color, blending it out with one of the mattes and then popping, a color as a highlight. I can definitely see myself using this on more of a daily basis. So I did say at the start that I was luckily sent this for PR because I think normally, because of my makeup collection and the fact that I did see it as being sort of too similar to the Sultry palette, I wouldn't have personally have bought it straight away. Maybe if I saw it on sale, I'd go, oh yeah, maybe I'll pick it up. But I have so many palettes that this was not really on my radar to purchase. But after I have used it for 5 days, I see the benefit of it. And I'm not telling people to go out and buy it because I don't give a shit what you do with your money. And I definitely don't think this is so unique that you have to get it now. But if you don't have these shades and you do like Urban Decay formula, I think this is not a bad palette. And if If somehow I have this knowledge that I've got now and I didn't have this palette, I would definitely consider buying this because I think it's a very usable palette. It's basic but easy to use, and I liked all the looks I created from it. And I think that's probably the most important thing, is that all the colors work well together and I like the overall look. So I do like this. So yeah, I can understand why people think this is kind of boring and they're not excited about it, but I can also understand why people are excited about it because it's actually a pretty decent palette for me. For my color preferences and how I like to wear my makeup, I like this palette. So that's the end of that. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed that video. I will be back in a couple of weeks doing this same sort of series with a Juvia's Place palette, so a much more colorful palette. I need to get back onto my 1 month one palette for February because I haven't finished that yet. I've been focusing too much on this palette, but I will be back. I've got lots of palettes to play with, so yeah, I just need to figure out how to schedule it all. But I will be back for a more sort of colorful version of this series very soon. All right, guys, if you like that, give it a thumbs up and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.